Hi, my name's Joseph from Mental Health Europe, and welcome to the Beyond the Label series. On this episode, peer support. Many people with lived experience of a variety of mental health issues, ranging from depression to schizoaffective disorder, have met health professionals that failed to understand them. But what if there was another way? In this video, I talk with Michael Ryan of HSE Ireland, a person of lived experience, and one of the foremost experts on peer support. We explore what peer support is, why it might be useful for you, and why you might not yet be able to access it.
My name is Michael Ryan and I'm a person with lived experience. I work for the Health Service Executive in Ireland. I'm head of the Office of Mental Health Engagement and Recovery. The function of that office is to integrate lived experience expertise into the design, development, delivery, evaluation of services, and we would have a number of programs that we would use to achieve that. Recovery would be an underpinning principle in our national policy sharing the vision. We would have a framework for recovery in mental health services document, and then we would have a strategy for the work of our office. And the five key programs are engagement to inform with service improvement, peer support working, recovery education, individual placement and support to help people get back to work. And we would lead on the implementation of a number of recommendations in our national mental health policy, which are deemed most suitable to be led by people with lived experience. I would also have a role with the World Health Organization and would have been involved in the drafting and development of the new WHO roadmap on integrating lived experience into health systems.
What is peer support?
So peer support is an application of lived experience. So lived experience we understand as the wisdom, experience, knowledge that comes from living with a mental health condition, recovering from it, using services. So lived experience is an expertise in its own right. It has a number of applications. One of those is peer support working. So a peer support worker uses their lived experience to support another person who has similar challenges. So what it offers and provides is it offers a connection to the person. So it's somebody that they can relate to, empathize with, who understands what they're talking about, with the actual practicality of what they're feeling, what they're living with on a daily basis. And very much it offers hope as well that the person, not only do they have the experience the same thing, but they more than likely have moved to a place of recovery. So it's not a clinical role, but I think it's around social and peer support. But it does have a therapeutic benefit, and maybe it helps people engage with services better and get more out of it from what they need for themselves.
What could be the benefits of peer support over other forms of therapy?
When we think about a contemporary understanding of mental health and recovery, we're talking about a whole person approach. So what does recovery mean for a person? I suppose there's various definitions of it, but one that springs to mind is it's about becoming the best version of yourself. So it's about not just about recovering from whatever clinical condition you have, but it's also about building your life. So it's about achieving your potential as a person. It's about getting a home. It's about getting a job. It's about connecting to your community. So if you think about all those things, it's unrealistic to think that any one person or discipline or could support a person with all those. So we're talking about a recovery orientated service where you bring together a lot of expertise, where the person is at the center, what we call the centrality of lived experience, and we try to support the person to achieve recovery that they self-determine. So I suppose in that context, peer support is very important because it sets the person out on their journey. It helps them to understand their condition better, to come into relationship, maybe with their own mental health better. It gives them, hope, and it gives them practical knowledge of how to start to change things. A peer support worker can, help people engage better and get more out of the services. It can improve communication, and if you think of a person's journey in recovery at a different point in that recovery, some things may be more relevant than others. So it might be a clinical intervention, then they might need housing, then they might need a job, or so. There's different expertise required at different times, but the thing that can link them all, the person who can accompany them on that journey, is the peer support worker. And I suppose what makes the peer support worker unique is that if you think of a doctor comes, he has to ascertain a diagnosis, a nurse comes, has to implement a care plan or something, an occupational therapist has to come and, give you some occupational activities or whatever. But a peer support worker comes without an agenda. Their agenda is simply, where are you at today? What do you need help with? How can I accompany you today? So I suppose to me that's kind of the fundamental role and difference.
Yeah. No, that sounds really useful and great. Now, as a person with lived experience, is this something that I would be able to access today? Is this something that already exists?
So, in the context of my own country, it's unfortunately still a little bit of kind of what we'd call a postcode lottery. Some areas have good peer support services, others don't. And as I said earlier, we're talking about lived experience, expertise in general. Peer support is just one application of that. So, it could also be recovery education or, peer mentoring or coaching. But so it does a little bit depend on where you are. Even within peer support itself, there's different applications. So some peer support workers work directly on community mental health teams. Others work in NGOs. Then you have things like peer-led centres, which are totally lived experience led and run. There's a lot of availability online, and I suppose one of the things we have to try and do too is demystify a little bit, recovery, mental health in general, and things like peer support working. Yeah. And the real power of lived experience is at an individual person's level. It's unleashing the strength within themselves, the knowledge they have about their own lives, their own conditions, what they've learned, and so on. Probably that it's possible that a few people, can come together and start their own peer support group. And while intentional peer support is, I suppose, an application, almost a discipline in itself, we don't want to make it too exclusive, Yeah. And it's about looking at the strengths the person has themselves and helping them to kind of know them and to trust them a little bit as well, and that they can start building recovery from their own strength as well.
Yeah. And I think that leads on to what would you say are the key barriers to bringing it about as a more accessible tool to recovery?
I think the barriers to this way of working and to kind of the recovery approach in general are misunderstanding what we mean by systems and many healthcare professionals around recovery. So I suppose it's, recovery is self-defined by the person. It's not just about the elimination of symptoms, although that's very useful, but it's about, connecting back to life and having a meaningful life. As the role of peer support, for example, then isn't valued maybe as much as other disciplines. So it's considered a nice thing to have, but it's not essential. So I suppose one of the responses to that is that we really have to try and create an understanding of the concept of lived experience as an epistemology, as a knowledge set in its own right, that's different but comparable and equal to other knowledge sets, that if you really want to help people recover, you have to be able to provide them with access to this knowledge. So I suppose structures within systems to support recovery and roles like peer support working are a problem. Supervision, self-care challenges for peer support workers in what can be sometimes very challenging systems. Obviously, resourcing in terms of funding to develop recovery and peer support programs. These are challenges, and I suppose stigma is still a big issue. Both stigma in general population and within systems themselves, but even self-stigma. The notion that people can and do recover is a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally, do you have any final messages or thoughts for people that think peer support might be for them, or that might be exploring joining a program that might help them offer peer support?
So I think, that the message we need to get out there is, that recovery is for everybody. Everybody has the right to recover. It's a human right to live a full and meaningful life, and to have autonomy in making decisions about your own life and your own healthcare. So that's the first thing to say, and that if you're coming from a place where you may have experienced a mental health challenge, or that may be ongoing, that peer support has something really to offer, because it's talking to people who've been in that place and have found a way of moving on and becoming the best version of themselves. So I would recommend everybody to engage in recovery through a recovery college, through reading about it, through a peer support group if you can. And maybe there's no peer support structure in whatever place you are, but there's online options available, and there's loads of guidance and stuff that you can get, and I'm always guided by one of my first engagements around this when I heard about recovery colleges, which is an application of lived experience and peer support, and I spoke to Julie Repper, and I was thinking about if you need to set up a recovery college, well, you need buildings and you need libraries and you need professors and all this kind of stuff, and she said, all you need, Michael, is a table, a chair, maybe a cup of tea, and two people who want to talk about recovery. So I suppose really what we want to encourage people is to realise there's a strength inside themselves. There's a knowledge about themselves. There's dreams and things, and it's about unleashing those. So I would really encourage people to embrace lived experience, recovery, peer support working.
I think that sounds lovely. Thank you so much for having this conversation, and we'll speak soon.
We hope you enjoyed that video and learned something about peer support. For more information on peer support, you can find our guidelines at www.mentalhealtheurope.org.